Singapore holds regular elections. Citizens vote freely. Opposition parties exist legally and contest seats. International observers generally classify Singapore as a democracy, yet the same party has governed continuously since 1959. The People's Action Party hasn't just won elections for 65 years, it's dominated them, typically controlling over 90% of parliamentary seats, despite winning 60 to 70% of votes. This isn't democracy failing, it's democracy functioning exactly as designed to produce predetermined outcomes. This isn't about dictatorship or authoritarianism in conventional forms. It's about what happens when a society engineers political competition so carefully that opposition exists but cannot threaten power. When the mechanisms of control are so deeply embedded in legal and social structures that overt repression becomes unnecessary, when the system allows dissent precisely because it's been structured to ensure dissent remains ineffective. But before we start, if you're interested in understanding how power actually operates in modern states, subscribe now and share your thoughts in the comments. The electoral system itself reveals design choices that shape outcomes without obviously violating democratic principles. The group representation constituency system requires candidates to run in teams, typically 4 or 5 members, with at least one minority representative. This was introduced to ensure minority representation in Parliament, a laudable goal, but it also advantages the ruling party enormously. Opposition parties struggle to field 4 or 5 qualified candidates per constituency. They can't offer minority candidates the same quality as PAP because talent flows to the party that guarantees victory. The barrier to entry gets raised from convincing voters you're better than one PAP candidate to fielding an entire team superior to PAP's team. That's exponentially harder. The GRC system also allows PAP to deploy ministers and established leaders alongside new candidates, giving newcomers visibility and credibility they couldn't earn independently. Opposition parties cannot match this. Their established leaders must spread thin across constituencies or concentrate in a few, leaving most GRCs uncontested. The system that supposedly ensured minority representation functions primarily to maintain PAP dominance while creating plausible deniability that the electoral structure itself advantages incumbents. The boundary delineation process, officially handled by an independent electoral boundaries review committee, happens irregularly and without transparent criteria. Boundaries can change dramatically between elections, breaking up opposition strongholds or grouping them with PAPP supporting areas. The EBRC reports to the Prime Minister, who is PAP's leader. The independence is nominal. Opposition parties discover new boundaries weeks before elections, too late to reorganize effectively. This isn't crude gerrymandering, it's sophisticated boundary management that achieves the same goals through constitutional processes. The nominated member of parliament and non-constituency member of parliament systems add complexity that further advantages PAP. NCMPs are opposition candidates who lost elections but received seats to ensure minimum opposition presence. This sounds democratic until you realize it allows PAP to control exactly how much opposition exists, win too many seats legitimately, and no NCMPs are appointed. The opposition's best electoral performance still results in minority status, while PAP can point to opposition presence as evidence of pluralism. NMPs are appointed based on contributions to society, a selection process PAP controls. These members debate and vote, lending appearance of diverse viewpoints while ensuring PAP maintains overwhelming majority. The defamation law environment deserves particular attention because it's both legal and devastatingly effective. Singapore's defamation laws allow officials to sue for damages that can reach hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Opposition politicians who criticize government policies or officials face serial lawsuits. Win or lose the legal case, the costs are ruinous. A single lawsuit can bankrupt an individual, multiple lawsuits guarantee it. The laws don't prevent criticism, they make it financially suicidal. Opposition leaders learn to calibrate their criticism carefully, avoiding statements that might trigger suits, which means avoiding the most effective criticisms. The bankruptcy that follows successful defamation suits comes with political consequences. Bankrupts cannot run for parliament. This creates an elegant mechanism: sue opposition leaders for defamation, win damages they cannot pay, bankrupt them, disqualify them from politics. The process is entirely legal. Courts issue judgments based on law, but the cumulative effect eliminates its effective opposition leadership systematically. By the time you've learned how to campaign effectively, built name recognition, demonstrated capability, you've also likely said something actionable, and the lawsuits begin. The media environment completes the control ecosystem without requiring crude censorship. Major media outlets are owned by companies with government-linked ownership structures. Editors understand the boundaries without needing explicit direction. Opposition politicians receive less coverage, and what coverage exists focuses on their weaknesses rather than their platforms. Government initiatives get prominent positive coverage. This isn't enforced through visible censorship, but through ownership structures, editorial appointments, and professional norms that everyone in journalism understands. Self-censorship is far more efficient than state censorship because it requires no enforcement apparatus. The online media regulations extend this control into digital spaces. The Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, FAMA, allows ministers to declare statements false and require corrections. There's an appeals process, but it's slow and expensive. In the meantime, the correction label appears, damaging credibility. The law applies to factual claims, supposedly, but the line between fact and opinion blurs in political discourse. Ministers use FAMA regularly against opposition politicians and critical online voices. The effect is chilling. Say something controversial, risk being FAMA'd, see your credibility damaged regardless of whether the claim was actually false. The Internal Security Act represents the ultimate backstop, rarely used but always present. The ISA allows detention without trial for threats to national security, defined broadly enough to encompass almost anything government decides threatens stability. The law emerged from colonial emergency regulations and was retained after independence. It hasn't been used against political opposition in decades, precisely because it doesn't need to be. Its existence reminds everyone that if other mechanisms fail, this option remains. The visible mechanisms of control make the invisible ones unnecessary. The Public Assembly regulations require police permits for any gathering of 5 or more people if it relates to political causes. Speaker's Corner exists as a designated area for speech, but it's isolated, surveilled, and requires registration. Spontaneous protests don't happen in Singapore because they're illegal and enforcement is strict. This prevents opposition from building movements, from creating visible demonstrations of support, from generating the energy that comes from collective action. Political competition gets channeled entirely through sanctioned electoral processes where the playing field is already tilted. The institutional capture extends beyond obvious political structures into civil society. Trade unions are organized under the National Trades Union Congress, which historically aligned with PAP and continues that relationship. Professional associations, community organizations, and civil society groups all operate under frameworks that encourage cooperation with government rather than independence from it. Truly independent civil society barely exists. Organizations that might provide institutional foundation for opposition politics either don't form or get co-opted into consultative roles that neuter their independence. The town council system creates another dependency mechanism. Each constituency's elected members form a town council managing local services, maintenance, and improvements. This means PAP constituencies get well-managed estates because PAP has experience and resources to hire competent managers. Opposition constituencies sometimes struggle because they lack institutional knowledge and resources. Residents experience this as opposition incompetence, not as structural disadvantage. Vote opposition, risk your estate deteriorating is the implicit message. And it works because the connection between vote choice and service quality is real, even if the causal mechanism is engineered. The upgrade campaigns that PAP uses during elections crystallize this dynamic. The government announces estate improvements, lift upgrades, facility enhancements, conditional on constituencies voting PAP. Opposition wards might get upgrades later or might not, depending on various factors. This isn't subtle, and it's technically legal because government can prioritize spending. But it transforms elections into referendums on whether residents want immediate tangible benefits or want to make political statements that cost them material improvements. Most people choose the former. The generational leadership transition PAP manages carefully prevents the sclerosis that kills many long-ruling parties. New leaders are identified early, given ministerial experience, tested in elections as part of established teams. By the time they lead the party, they're proven administrators with track records. Opposition parties cannot replicate this pipeline. They rely on individuals willing to sacrifice careers for unlikely electoral success. The quality gap between PAP and opposition candidates isn't inherent, it's produced by different opportunity structures. Talented people join PAP because that's where influence and success lie. The economic success argument provides PAP's most powerful legitimation. Why change a government that delivered prosperity? The economy grew, poverty disappeared, housing improved, healthcare got better, all under PAP leadership. This track record makes opposition criticism seem churlish or risky. If it works, why fix it? This logic has power, but it assumes the current government deserves credit for success rather than success emerging from geographic position, historical timing, and capable bureaucracy that might serve any competent government equally well. Separating party from state becomes impossible when the party governed throughout the relevant period. The national narrative itself functions as political infrastructure. The story Singapore tells about itself, vulnerability requiring unity, existential threats demanding discipline, meritocracy enabling success. This narrative serves PAP because PAP authored it and embodies it institutionally. Opposition parties struggle to propose alternative narratives without seeming to reject Singapore itself. Criticizing PAP's housing policy feels like criticizing Singapore's housing success. Questioning economic strategy feels like risking prosperity. The conflation of party and nation isn't accidental, it's cultivated carefully through decades of governance. The psychological experience of opposition supporters deserves acknowledgement, knowing your vote won't change outcomes, watching your preferred candidates lose repeatedly, seeing criticism dismissed or punished. This creates learned helplessness. Political participation feels performative rather than meaningful. Some people continue voting opposition as principle or protest, but many conclude it's not worth the trouble. The system allows opposition precisely because it's confident opposition won't win. And that confidence becomes self-fulfilling as people internalize powerlessness. The international legitimacy Singapore maintains makes domestic political reform harder. Western democracies accept Singapore as broadly democratic, a strategic partner, a responsible state. This acceptance provides cover. If Singapore were classified as authoritarian, domestic pressure for change might build. But when international community treats you as democratic, domestic critics seem unreasonable or extreme. The external validation reinforces internal status quo. The legal system's independence is real in commercial and criminal matters, but questionable in political cases. Judges rule against government regularly in non-political contexts, building credibility. But in defamation cases against opposition politicians or cases involving political speech, government wins with striking consistency. Whether this reflects law genuinely favoring government or subtle pressure shaping judicial reasoning is impossible to determine from outside. The outcomes speak for themselves. The opportunity cost of opposition participation is severe enough to deter most potential candidates. Running for parliament means months of campaigning, likely loss, possible lawsuits, damage to professional reputation, and no compensation unless you win. PAP candidates who lose still have party support and often rejoin government in other capacities. Opposition candidates who lose return to careers that suffered from their absence with nothing to show for it. The asymmetry ensures that opposition attracts primarily idealists willing to sacrifice for principle, not pragmatists calculating cost-benefit. The information environment shapes public perception through accumulated bias. Government initiatives receive years of positive coverage building public trust. Opposition proposals get scrutinized skeptically. This creates different standards. PAP ideas are presumed workable until proven otherwise. Opposition ideas are presumed problematic until proven viable. The evidentiary burden falls unequally, making it harder for opposition to gain credibility even when their proposals have merit. The younger generation's relationship with this system is complex. They've known only PAP governance, seen only PAP success. Grown up in prosperity, PAP claims credit for creating. But they also have internet access, exposure to global political discourse, awareness that other democracies function differently. Some younger Singaporeans are more willing to vote opposition as protest or principle, but structural barriers that prevent opposition from winning majority support remain. Generational change in voting patterns doesn't overcome gerrymandering, GRC systems, or institutional advantages. The question of what opposition victory would actually look like reveals the system's depth. If opposition somehow won majority, they'd inherit government institutions staffed by people hired under PAP, media owned by government-linked companies, town councils they don't know how to manage, and administrative systems designed by and for PAP. The transition would be chaotic, not because opposition is incompetent, but because the entire machinery of state evolved to serve single-party governance. This isn't accidental, it's design dependency. The comparison to other dominant party democracies shows Singapore isn't unique in structure, but is exceptional in effectiveness. Japan's LDP governed for decades but faced real competition and lost power eventually. Mexico's PRI dominated, but through more obviously corrupt mechanisms. Singapore's PAP governs through processes that appear democratic while ensuring minimal competition threatens power. The sophistication lies in maintaining legitimacy through forms that resemble democracy while engineering outcomes that resemble hegemony. The philosophical question remains whether this is democracy at all or something else wearing democracy's clothing. Elections happen, votes are counted accurately, opposition exists legally. But if the system is designed to prevent opposition from winning, if power never actually changes hands, if criticism is legal but effectively forbidden through lawsuits and social pressure, is that meaningfully democratic? Or is it sophisticated authoritarianism that learned to use democratic processes for authoritarian ends? The stability this system provides has genuine value. Singapore avoided the political chaos, corruption, and dysfunction that plague many democracies. Policy maintains long-term coherence. Administrators can plan knowing government won't change. Investment flows to political stability. These benefits are real, but they come with costs. The innovation that comes from political competition, the accountability that comes from threat of removal, the dynamism that comes from different parties implementing different visions. Singapore sacrifices these for stability. The sustainability question looms because systems this controlled eventually brittle. Opposition that exists but cannot win doesn't develop governing capability. When transition finally comes, whether through crisis, demographic change, or accumulated frustration, the opposition inherits power without experience. The very mechanisms that prevented them from winning also prevented them from learning to govern. This creates risks of instability and mismanagement whenever transition occurs. The control mechanisms are so normalized that most Singaporeans don't experience them as control. They experience orderly elections, functioning government, rising prosperity. The constraints on opposition seem reasonable or necessary for stability. Only when you step back and examine the entire system does the architecture of control become visible. Each element seems defensible individually. Collectively, they create a political monopoly that democracy cannot dislodge. Singapore built a system where opposition is permitted but prevented from succeeding, where criticism is legal but punished through lawsuits, where elections happen but outcomes are predetermined by structural advantages, where media exists but practices self-censorship, where democracy's forms survive but its substance evaporates. This isn't failure of democratic institutions, it's their successful deployment for anti-democratic ends. The system works exactly as designed. Whether what it produces deserves to be called democracy is a question Singapore's rulers never have to answer because they've ensured no one with power to change things has incentive to ask.